Hello, we're excited that you've joined us. This is the Working with Schools training. This is one of the four-part series of the Balanced Recruitment trainings that IDRC has put together. So we're glad that you can be here with us today and just want to go through. My name is Jessica Castaneda first, and I work with the IDRC Consortium as the project director. And I'm excited to just share some thoughts with you, some slides, some training resources that are available on one of the four areas. We believe that there are four really important areas of IDNR. And so we've developed a four-part training series that will cover each one of these different areas, and we're calling it Balanced Recruitment. So we want you to be able to use these resources, to be able to access them as you need. Maybe you're using it as a training resource for a recruiter that you're training. Maybe you're a brand new recruiter and you're wondering, how you're supposed to do everything. This is basically our guidance on the four different areas and how you can use them, and some direct ideas of how some of these ideas might be beneficial in the field. So we really believe that for MEP programs to be successful, they need to thoroughly be looking at all four of these areas. And so this involves canvassing or covering housing, working to recruit in the community, developing partnerships with community agencies, and then also developing partnerships and abilities to be able to get into these different farms, fisheries, and agribusinesses while you're working with schools. And so there are several different areas, and we feel like this one's, all of these are important. And so this particular one, we're going to look at working with schools. So what is balanced recruitment? You're looking at all of those areas: the community recruitment, the housing, the farms, fishing, agribusinesses, and schools, and really ensuring that you're being thorough in working in all four of those areas. So this specific training is going to look at why school-based recruitment is really important, how you can identify schools and staff who can really help you, how to build relationships that lead to referrals, and how to organize your information and identify the best ways to do outreach. So schools are a lot of times are where migrant staff are housed. In some states, most of the staff are school-based. In other states, they're completely through maybe community agencies, or they work, separate from the schools. But all migrant programs should be developing really a multi-level approach to figure out how to best work with the school districts in their state. And so this approach shouldn't just rest on the shoulders of a recruiter. It should be kind of, a tiered system where there are some things that are happening on the state level, some things that are happening on the district level, and things that could be happening on a recruiter level. Now, of course, this may change. It may be, the state level, and then maybe you have a regional setup. And so depending on your configuration of how your migrant program is, the main idea is that recruiters are not standing alone, that the state is not standing alone, that everyone's kind of working together to really see how each recruiter can best work with the schools. So from the state level, there's some best practices. For example, state directors should really be actively working to develop partnerships from the state level down. So for example, there are state meetings where, maybe the Title I directors are all getting together. And so, or meetings where the superintendents are getting together. If you have state migrant ed staff, maybe the state director is working to attend those meetings, maybe get some of the things about migrant ed on the agenda, making sure that people across the state, whether they receive migrant programs or not, are very aware of what migrant ed is and how they can work to help to try to identify eligible students in their districts. So for example, all students should be aware of the migrant program. It shouldn't be something that they haven't heard of. Title I directors should be aware and informed of what the program entails and their specific responsibilities related to Title I. And so, for example, migrant students should get free lunch across your state. And so maybe there's not a program in the district where they live, but the district should know that that migrant child is eligible for free lunch. But specifically from the state down, there should be some efforts made. One of the best, what we call best practices, is the idea of having some sort of parent survey or some sort of occupation survey that really is given, the questions may vary by state. And this is just an example of part of one right here on the screen. The idea is this survey will help quickly identify if there's a possibility that a child might be eligible for the migrant program. So this is an example from Tennessee. So it's asking, did someone come to Tennessee looking for temporary seasonal work in a factory processing foods, or working in agriculture, fishing, or dairy? And then there's a yes or no. And then kind of other clarifying information on who it was. Does someone currently work in this? And if your job is not temporary, or, has someone moved in the last 3 years? So the idea that this would be given to all newly enrolled students. You don't want to make the burden be huge where you're giving it to every student in the state every year. But the idea is to quickly identify possible newly enrolled students into a district that might possibly be eligible for the migrant program. So this survey is way easier to be done if the state has an initiative for districts to do this across the state, rather than recruiters coming from the bottom going into a school, kind of the bottom up approach of saying, hey, I've got this survey, it would be really nice if you filled it out. So you want to make sure that it's kind of top down so that it's a lot easier to do. So this survey should let you know, does this child possibly have a parent, or they themselves have ever been a migratory agricultural worker? So then you want to make sure that you determine the best way to work with districts, the best way to make sure everyone's filling it out. And then also in the same time that if there's any yeses, that gets to a recruiter just as soon as possible, so they then can follow up and also, directly reach out to the family and find out if they're eligible, but quickly also reach back to the school and let them know if the results of that, so that the district staff, those teachers that are helping make sure this happens, that they see that, that something's happening with that we're using them and they're not just piling up in somebody's office. So like it mentions here, you want to make sure this is not a super cumbersome process, that you kind of streamline this. And it says a full process should be developed to determine the best way to ensure that all newly enrolled students in the district are able to take the survey. So maybe they have an electronic enrollment process. And so it's figuring out the best way to ensure that survey is part of that process, and then that information can be, given and pulled out to the migrant ed program. So a few other kind of best practice ideas is a lot of times states already have assigned liaisons for different programs like McKinney-Vento. So it can be helpful for states to also have an assigned migrant ed liaison. And maybe they don't receive any funding, but they could be the person, the go-to person in the district to get those surveys from, for example. Or if a migrant student does reside in that district and maybe programming is done by another area, that they know that there is a person you can reach out and find out how the child is doing in school, and some sort of person that is absolutely responsible for, being that liaison between the state and the school district for migrant ed. So another best practice would make sure that as many personnel, if it was maybe it was the McKinney-Vento person that's also the migrant ed liaison, that they should be trained. They should be trained on eligibility requirements. They should be trained on what happens when a migrant student is found. You want to make sure that the districts know what is available for the migrant kids in their particular district. So there are some things like we just mentioned, that was free lunch, that's a given, but what is your migrant program offering in their area, so they can clearly know the benefits of the program and also can be motivated to try to help to try to find additional children that might be eligible. It can also be helpful to have a yearly training for all districts in coordination with other states' trainings. For example, maybe they're brought in for a principal's training or superintendent's training, and you can get on the agenda and make sure that everyone is aware of MEP. So you can have your assigned liaisons attend the meeting. Maybe it's ELL, program directors, attendance staff, principals. All of those would be key staff that would be really helpful to ensure that they know about migrant ed. So it says here, we want to make sure that all students are identified in the state. So you don't want to just say, well, I think we recruit probably in half of our counties. We want to have a thorough approach to ensure that all migrant students in each state are thoroughly, if they reside, that they'll be found. So it says here, MEP programs should be extremely thorough in their approach in finding eligible migrant students, and schools are an important part of this process. So don't assume that some districts don't have migrant students. Make sure by ensuring that all students are filling out those needed surveys, all newly enrolled, that you have those liaisons who can help be your eyes and ears, and that all superintendents are also fully aware. And so this is kind of from the state level down. So once you get those surveys, this is really important, because sometimes you hear of migrant programs that'll say, well, we have this stack of surveys, we just haven't had time to go through them. Or there's just too many in this, and I don't think we're just not yielding the results that we need. You want to make sure that your survey is targeted to the point, that it's helpful and that it serves its purpose. But when you get that survey, you want to make sure that you follow up as soon as possible. So it can be helpful once those are completed to contact the schools and report back on the results. And this really ensures that they know that when you gather those forms, when you get them, that you're going to do something with them, and that hopefully they'll see the benefit, and hopefully migrant students will be identified through that. There's some other ideas that can be done kind of state level down or district level, would be the idea of really marketing your program. So it may be helpful to send a newsletter out. When you're doing these invites for people to learn more about migrant ed, maybe you're doing some highlights of things that that's working really well. Maybe you highlight the benefit of the migrant program in one student's life, around graduation time. Just things that'll get the migrant ed in a positive view to people even before you meet them. So, example, it says this newsletters could have highlights of students who have benefited greatly, staff comments, or their thoughts about the benefits of the program, as well as some updates of identification recruitment effort in the state. So kind of where you're working at, partnerships. A lot of times districts, there are direct staff whose spouses work in something in agriculture in their area. And so maybe, really capitalizing on that and letting them know that you're trying to work in the community, you might be able to meet some more, build your network for that. So it can be helpful to really have a dedicated focus on trying to market your program. So it's helpful to get the word out through, face-to-face contact, through emails, through Zoom calls, through training, through flyers, through brochures, newsletters, etc. So now once you get to the local level, the local school district staff should know the local recruiter and the migrant project director. So local migrant staff should be trying to build relationships with those attendant staff, with school secretaries, with English language teachers, with the principals. So a relationship can be built between both groups that can really mutually benefit both the school and migrant ed program and migrant ed students. So it's also helpful if services are provided outside of the local school district that they know what the program is providing to the students. Maybe you do an in-home tutoring program and you want to make sure that you have a kind of a connection between the local school and the tutor. And so you let the district know and you figure out the best way to be able to have that tutor communicate with that child's teacher. So sometimes MEP can hold a very valuable spot between being a liaison between the MEP family and the school, and you really want to work to build that relationship. Another thing that can be really helpful for recruiters is to know in their local area the mobility data. And so this is kind of a outside of the box request sometimes that we might not think of, but schools they know where they have the most mobile students in their school district. And so maybe there's a particular elementary school that has movement in and out. And so one of the things that we're going to also try to talk about later on in one of the other trainings is about campusing housing. But if I know a school that has a lot more mobility, then probably the housing right around there is going to have more mobility also. And so I feel like it's really helpful for you to know which areas in the county or the district have the most movement, and then be able to also canvass some of that housing around that school to ensure that you're finding the families that are coming and going. Also, this would be a really important school to ensure that you're getting the surveys throughout the year as kids are moving in and out. So schools often have a lot of other programs that migrant families are not aware of. A lot of times there's, after school programs, there's different programs, the tutoring programs that they're doing that may fly under the radar of what migrant parents are even aware of. So you want to make sure that you're also asking the school for the resources that you should be sharing with migrant families. Maybe they give out, school supplies at a certain time of the year, and that migrant families could be aware of that. So you want to be aware of all of these kind of services and then share that with families. So this sometimes is easier when recruiters are housed in schools, but it's not an excuse if recruiters are not housed in schools. Building those relationships can really be key so that you can be just as aware of those types of resources and offerings that are happening from the districts. So if you're working with migrant students and their families and they have needs, you can also help the schools be aware of those, and you can share that. You want to make sure that working together with the schools, the migrant ed program can really make a much greater impact than if they're just working alone. And schools really should see the migrant program as a direct ally in the effort to really serve migrant students. And so they're a great partner. One thing we want to make sure is that migrant ed is not since we are supplemental, that we're not taking over a job of someone that that should already be doing that. A school district should already be offering something to. So for example, you're now becoming the only translator that the school's using, and it's being paid by migrant funds, and the school is still responsible to have a translator. And so you want to make sure that you're not doing the job of someone else. So it should be in addition to what the school is already offering. So it says in here, MEP staff are often able to help families understand the complex school meetings to ensure that parents can advocate for their children, but you do want to make sure that you're not taking over someone else's job, and that we are completely supplemental. So one other thing about school meetings, it can be very helpful to get permission to set up a table, maybe on registration nights or family and parent events, to help get the word out about the program. And you can also be strategic about posting flyers and information at the right places that families come through. So those are some basic ideas for working with school districts. And so we have 3 other parts to this series. So feel free to listen in on the other one and use the resources however you deem necessary or helpful. And we really, really feel like working with schools is a very key part of balanced recruitment. Thank you.